going to begin with some very interesting words, not from an Irishman, but from Ibsen. And he wrote this, and it's very apropos to fluoridation. He said, "It is not only what we have inherited from our mother and father that walks in us. It is all sorts of dead ideas and lifeless old beliefs. They have no vitality, but they cling to us all the same, and we cannot shake them off. Whenever I take up a newspaper, I seem to see ghosts gliding between the lines. There must be ghosts all the country over, as thick as the sands of the sea, and then we are, one and all, so pitifully afraid of the light." And that's where we are in Ireland. We have scientists, doctors, dentists, government health officials, bureaucrats, pitifully afraid of the light, pitifully afraid to admit that they've made a huge mistake. But I was part of that. 18 years ago, I was part of those people that was afraid of the light on this issue. And I'd already been approached by 3 different activists to get involved with fluoridation, but I didn't. But then the 4th person came along, and I couldn't resist her. It was my wife. And one afternoon, she put a cup of tea, I should have been suspicious, on my desk and a pile of papers. And she said, "Dear, would you read these papers?" And I said, "What is it?" She said, "Fluoridation." I said, "Take those away. These people are crazy." You see, I'd fallen for the ghosts. I'd fallen for this lifeless old idea that the people opposed to fluoridation were a bunch of Looney Tunes, Flat Earth Society, and of course all the great authorities in the world are pro-fluoridation. I'd fallen for that myth, as many other people have. But being my wife, and the reason I didn't want this issue, in addition to that, was that I was very busy teaching chemistry and working on waste management, which is something I've been doing for 29 years, and it's taken me to 62 different countries. Pretty darn busy. So I didn't want a 3rd issue, but I certainly didn't want a 3rd issue that would stigmatize me as being a little crazy, not for my academic colleagues. I should point out I'm a retired professor of chemistry. My specialty is environmental chemistry and toxicology. Anyway, I started to read those papers, and I was humbled and embarrassed that I'd gone along accepting this myth that is peddled to us. And I was shocked by the information I found. I'd been nurturing the idea that these poor anti-fluoridation people had confused the element fluorine, which is the most reactive substance we know. It reacts with everything, including asbestos, with fluoride, the humble little fluoride ion. For a chemist, that's like confusing chlorine gas, which is very toxic, kills people, used in World War I, and salt, sodium chloride. Once the elements become the compound, it's usually, its reaction has reactive properties right down. But when I read what she gave me, I found out it was extremely active biologically. Not very active from a chemical perspective. You could get a jar of sodium fluoride and have it sitting on a shelf for years, it won't do anything. But from a biological perspective, very, very active. Very active. It interferes with enzymes. We now know it switches on G proteins, which are part of a messaging system throughout the body. It's not something you want anywhere near your body. And then I found one fact, which I still think is the most potent fact. And if you forget everything else that I say tonight, do not forget this. And that is how low the level of fluoride is in mother's milk. Incredibly low. Now, think about what mother's milk is. It's been developed over a very long time by nature, by God, to be the baby's first meal, to provide that baby with everything it needs. And yet, when you look at the fluoride levels there, it is actually 200 times less than you put in your drinking water in Ireland, or not you, your government puts in the drinking water. And what that means is today a bottle-fed infant, where the parent uses tap water to make up the formula, is giving their baby 200 times more fluoride than nature intended for a baby. And I think that is reckless. I think nature would know far more about what the baby needs than your bureaucrats in the health department in Ireland or any other country that fluoridates. Now, this subject gets more and more bizarre. And the temptation will be, there's something wrong with this guy. There's something wrong with this guy. He can't be telling us the truth. Well, I don't lie, but it is. What I'm about to tell you is pretty shocking stuff. And most people don't believe it. And most people don't want to believe it. They don't want to believe that their government doesn't give a totally cuss about their health and their children's health. They don't want to believe that. They want to believe that the government is there protecting them. So what I have to say is rather shocking. And you won't want to believe it. But trust me, after 18 years of studying this stuff, I'm not going to mislead you. The first thing that's shocking, since we are drinking this with every glass of water that we eat, and we get more every meal that we eat, and every beverage that we drink is going to have this fluoride in it. Meanwhile, we're getting bombarded with fluoride from toothpaste and so on. One of the first shocking facts is there is absolutely no evidence that the body needs fluoride. No one has ever demonstrated there's a biological process that needs fluoride to function. Or to put it another way, it is not an essential nutrient. And scientists have a way of determining if a substance is an essential nutrient. What they do is to starve the animal of fluoride, or the substance being investigated, from its diet. None in the diet. And if that animal develops a disease, then it's an essential nutrient. So if you starve an animal of vitamin C, it's going to get scurvy. So vitamin C is an essential nutrient, and so on. But no one's ever done that for fluoride. But on the other hand, what we do know is, as I've mentioned already, fluoride is highly toxic. It interferes with many biological processes. So why on earth do you take potential risk by swallowing it? Especially when you know that millions of people, I mean millions of people in India and China and parts of Iran and Mexico and other places where they have high natural levels of fluoride in their water have had their lives ruined by fluoride's toxicity. Many of them are crippled. And as you'll see, there's some other very devastating things that we now know that fluoride is doing to those children in China, in those endemic fluorosis areas. Now, for me, fluoridation is, and I mean, I can get very scientific, and I know the organizers don't want me to get very scientific tonight. It's not the purpose. But to me, fluoridation violates common sense and common decency. Yeah. Common sense and common decency. Let's say, isn't it amazing that since fluoridation began in the United States in 1945, we have never, ever used the tap water to deliver medication? Never. Why? Why have we not used the tap water to deliver other medication? They're much stronger candidates than fluoride, but we have never done it. And the reason is very simple. There are three reasons. One, when you add a medicine to the water, you cannot control the dose, because you cannot control how much water people drink. Oh yes, your engineers, your Irish engineers can control how much fluoride is added at the public waterworks. But what they can't do is to control the dose in milligrams per day. They control milligrams per liter, but they don't control how many liters we drink and how much fluoride we're getting from other sources. And ask any pharmacist if there's any drug that he can dispense where you say to the patient, take as much as you want. It doesn't happen. The second thing is, you can't control who gets this medicine. It goes to everybody. It goes to the very young. It goes to our bottle-fed babies. It goes to the very old. It goes to sick people. It goes to people with poor nutrition. It goes to people who have poor kidney function, who cannot remove the fluoride, so it accumulates much faster in their bones than for other people. And it goes to people with borderline iodine deficiency, which means that they are particularly vulnerable to fluoride's impact on the thyroid gland. But it goes to everybody. And they like that. That's what they want. They want a way of giving this what they consider to be dental treatment to everybody without any effort. So parents don't have to do anything. Just drink the tap water and you get medicated. So this to me, which I think is a great impediment to putting medicine in the drinking water, they see as an advantage. Now, the third reason, and this is the one which defies common decency, is it violates the individual's right, very important right, to informed consent to medication. And there's no mystery about informed consent to medication. It is an absolutely basic plank in modern medical ethics, and you can go to any website of any major medical organization in the world and look into informed consent, and it's very, very clear. The doctor has to explain to the patient what the thing is supposed to do, what it's good for, and to explain what the side effects might be, and then the patient is the one that decides whether to take this treatment or not. So the situation you've got here in Ireland is the government is doing to everyone what an individual doctor in Ireland can do to no one. That defies common decency. That the government here has abrogated to itself a right that it doesn't have. Government should not force medication on people.
Absolutely.
Most countries, though, are still on the common sense. Most countries don't do this. If you're living in Ireland, you probably think the whole world is fluoridating its water. Certainly if you live in the United States, you think that everybody's drinking fluoridated water. If you're a town in the United States that doesn't fluoridate its water, oh, you are against progress. You're not up with the times. Fluoridate your water. Oh, the vast majority of countries in the world do not fluoridate their water. 97% of the European population does not drink fluoridated water. Ireland is the only country in Europe that has mandatory water fluoridation. It's embarrassing. Now, to make it even more preposterous, I said this is preposterous, right? All these things. How many of these things do you need to know to say, stop it? But you would think, with all the hype about how this fights tooth decay, that if you looked at tooth decay in these non-fluoridated countries, it would be so much worse than the fluoridated ones. But it isn't. The World Health Organization online has mapped out the tooth decay in 12-year-olds in practically every industrialized country. And there is no difference between the rate with which tooth decay is coming down in 12-year-olds, whether they come from a fluoridated country or non-fluoridated country. And if you look in the today's figures, it's a wash, a comparison between the tooth decay in 12-year-olds in fluoridated and non-fluoridated countries. Now, there turns out to be a very simple explanation why the evidence that fluoridation actually lowers tooth decay is extremely weak. I don't have time to go through all the studies, but it is very weak. You can see it in my book. If you go to chapters 6, 7, and 8, it goes through the weakness of this evidence, which was a surprise to us. I mean, I thought the struggle was going to be to show that fluoride causes harm, but I just assumed that the evidence that it worked was very strong. Wouldn't you expect that? No. And in 1999, we found out why. When the Center of Disease Control or rather the Oral Health Division of the Center for Disease Control, which is only about 30 people, they're all dentally trained, announced, we used to think that for fluoride to work, it had to accumulate in the enamel before the teeth had erupted into the mouth, so that the enamel would be stronger and more resistant to the acid attack from sugar being broken down to acids. That's what they thought. But they said, whoops! They didn't use the word whoops, but I do. Whoops! We were wrong. It turns out that the predominant action of fluoride, as far as treating dental decay, is topical, not systemic. Now, wait a moment. The major benefit of fluoride is topical. Fluoridated toothpaste is universally available. In fact, it's downside more difficult to get non-fluoridated toothpaste than to get fluoridated toothpaste. It's universally available. So you have a method of delivering fluoride directly to the surface of the tooth and then spit it out. This way, you avoid exposing every tissue in the body to a known toxic substance, and you're not forcing it on people that don't want it. So in 1999, when the major promoter of fluoridation admitted that fluoride worked topically and not systemically, that should have been the end of fluoridation. There is no... Now it becomes incredibly arrogant for the dentistry and their government friends to force this on people that don't want it when they've admitted that it works topically. There's just no rationale, there's no justification for water fluoridation once they admitted that fact in 1999. So, again, when you study the mechanisms here, it's very clear tooth decay is not caused by too little fluoride. It's caused by too much sugar and too little brushing. So what we need in Ireland is not more fluoridation, but more education. Education. And guess what? In nearby Scotland, they have a program there called the Child Smile Program. And there they put the emphasis on education for dental hygiene and better diet, involving both the children and the parents working together. And they have introduced classes to teach kids how to brush their teeth. In their first classes, the first time a kid goes to school, they are taught by the teachers how to brush their teeth properly. They get healthy snacks in class, and as I said, they're working with the parents on the diet. And this program has been phenomenally successful. They've they've increased the number of kids from 10 to 12 who have no decay from about 42% to 73% in a few years. And it's saving them money. So that's what your bureaucrats, if they're going to earn some money, your civil servants, instead of spending it on more propaganda, they should be going over to Scotland, having a look at this program, and see if they could do that in Ireland. And guess what? There is another benefit from reducing sugar consumption in kids. It helps to fight obesity. And what is going to cripple our health agencies in all our countries is obesity leading to diabetes. We've got teenagers in the United States getting diabetes now, type 2 diabetes. That's going to cost the country billions of dollars. So how do you fund a program for education on fighting tooth decay? The answer is, you know that every penny that you spend fighting that is going to pay dividends in saved health costs, because you're also going to be fighting obesity. Now, what about the risks? I'm sure you want to know the risks. I'm just going to run through a list. The one they don't deny is that fluoride causes a condition called dental fluorosis, which is a mottling, discoloration of the teeth. When they started this, they thought only 10% of the kids would get it, but only in its very mild form that no one would notice except the dentist. Run the clock forward. In the United States, I don't know the figures for Ireland, but in the United States, we now have a situation with 41% of all American children, both from fluoridated and non-fluoridated communities, have dental fluorosis. 41% from 12 to 15. And 8.6% of them have it in the mild form, where 50% of the enamel is impacted, and 3.6% in the moderate or severe, where 100% of the enamel is impacted. What about fluoride's impact on the bones? We know in India and China you have a thing called skeletal fluorosis. In fact, when you go to China and go to the villages, the kids have dental fluorosis and the adults have skeletal fluorosis. It's all part of the same spectrum. Now, what we know is that 50%, almost 50% of all the fluoride you take in from every source accumulates in the bones over a lifetime. The half-life in the bone is about 20 years. And the first symptoms of fluoride's impact on the bones is just like arthritis. Pains in the joints, pains in the bone, stiffness of the joints. And guess what? Arthritis rates are increasing dramatically certainly in Ireland, in the United States. And guess what? Ireland is not making any effort at all to see if there's any relationship between how many years you spent in a fluoridated community and this condition. No studies at all. But that's not a surprise, because guess what? Since 1963, since fluoridation became mandatory, the Irish government has not sanctioned any health studies. None! Zilch! Nada! So when the Fluoridation Forum reported in 2002, which is the biggest piece of junk that's ever been written on this subject, they had no health studies to draw upon from Ireland, and yet they had the gall to turn around and say that fluoridation was safe and effective. Then the next thing, which should concern a lot of people in Ireland, is that fluoride impacts the thyroid gland. And we know that because doctors from Argentina, France and Germany in the 30s, 40s and 50s were giving fluoride tablets to people with overactive thyroid gland to reduce the activity of the thyroid gland. Now we have a vast number of people with hypothyroidism, underactive thyroidism. Join the dots. If you lower the activity of someone with hypothyroidism, what are you going to do to someone who's normal? You could lower their thyroid activity. Again, it's quite logical, but again, no attempt by the Irish government or any government in any fluoridated country to do any studies to see if the relationship with hypothyroidism has anything to do with fluoridation. Now the symptoms, you may not know the word, but the symptoms are, for hypothyroidism, depression, lack of energy, chronic fatigue. The people have tiredness, which is not relieved by sleep, overweight. So all these symptoms, we're very familiar with this. And also the #1 selling drug in Ireland, the #1 is Synthroid, the very drug that you treat somebody with underactive thyroid gland. Related to thyroid function is brain damage. The thyroid is very important for the development of the brain. And what we now have is an astounding body of evidence which shows that fluoride damages the brain. We have over 100 animal experiments, over 100 that show that fluoride can enter the brain and change brain chemistry. Hundreds of them, over 100. And the ones that I find pretty striking, we have 30 studies, 30 out of 32 studies. So 2 didn't find this effect, but 30 did. They found if they gave rats and mice fluoride, they performed less well in these mazes where they're taught to find the bit of cheese from the maze. And they found that the rats and mice treated with fluoride were less able to remember and less able to learn. So what would you think it's doing to our kids? Well, we have 41 out of 48 studies from China, India, Iran and Mexico, which shows an association between fairly modest exposure to fluoride and lowered IQ in children. What more do you need? How many of these studies have been done in Ireland? None! None! And very few in any of these fluoridated countries. So their standard modus operandi is to challenge the methodology, critique the weaknesses of the study, which is fair enough, but it does not lead to them trying to reproduce these studies. No one, for example, in Ireland has attempted to reproduce Jennifer Luke's findings that fluoride accumulates in the human pineal gland and actually lowers the production of melatonin in animals. Nobody in any fluoridated country has looked for that. So their attitude is, if you don't look, you don't find, and confusing the absence of study with the absence of harm. And finally, fluoridation may actually be killing a few young men with bone cancer. We have an unrefuted study from Harvard by Elise Basson, unrefuted study, where she found that young boys exposed to fluoridated water, or the equivalent, in their 6th, 7th, and 8th years, have a 5- to 7-fold increased risk of succumbing to osteosarcoma by the age of 20, and that bone cancer, osteosarcoma, is usually fatal. So this practice might actually be killing a few young boys every year. And how many teeth would you have to save for that? In fact, the largest survey study in the United States found a saving of 0.6 of one tooth surface for a child that lived all its life in a non-fluoridated area versus a child that lived in a fluoridated area. In the fluoridated, saving of 0.6 of one tooth surface out of 128 tooth surfaces in a child's mouth. So the saving is actually pitifully small, if it exists, but they didn't even show that that result was statistically significant. Now, to come, you probably know I was invited to participate in the Fluoridation Forum. And I accepted. They paid my airfare, my hotel, etc. And I called up the activists in Ireland. I said, guess what? The Irish government's paying my airfare to come over and testify at the Fluoridation Forum. So do you want me to give a talk to the citizens when I'm here? And they were furious, very angry. I think I got five transcontinental phones saying, don't do this. This is a rubber stamp. This is a rubber stamp. And you're going to give it some credibility. Well, I was in a difficult situation because on the one hand, if I didn't want to go against the activists I worked with, they are the ones who determined what the policy should be. On the other hand, if I didn't testify, then they would simply say, well, these scientists who are supposed to be against fluoridation, when they were challenged to produce the information in this scientific forum, they didn't show up. So anyway, with great misgivings, I did testify before the Fluoridation Forum in Cork in 2000, October 2000. And I had a brainwave. I thought, okay, this is what I'm going to do. I drew up a list of 50 reasons against fluoridation with scientific references. And I said to them when I testified, I said, you know, when I'm testifying here today, I've made some people in Ireland very, very upset because they think that you are a setup, that you are just a rubber stamp for this practice. And I said, I think the way that you can prove to me, and perhaps to the Irish people, that you are genuinely going to objectively look at the scientific literature, is to respond in writing to these 50 reasons and to give all your scientific references. Well, each one of those panel members, they said, oh, we're objective, we haven't made up our minds, blah, 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 blah. And at the end, the chairman says, well, we will set up a committee to look at your 50 reasons and answer all the questions. Well, before the final report came, they said, we don't have time. We don't have time to respond to Dr. Connett's 50 reasons, but some of them will be in the body of the work. They weren't. 4 years after agreeing to respond to these 50 reasons, anonymously on the Department of Health website came a critique, a response to these 50 reasons. And the response was not so much responding to the reasons, but attacking me, attacking my temerity for doing this whole thing. I mean, it's pathetic. And they didn't do it in a systematic fashion. I had to untangle. I found out there were about 20 questions they didn't even answer. And as you probably know, when the report came out in 2002, It was a rubber stamp. It was a rubber stamp for fluoridation. The citizen activists were right, absolutely right, in their concerns. But at least we proved that they couldn't answer scientific questions. So, to add to that, I've been here about 6 times on this issue, many more times on waste before that, but about 6 times on fluoridation. Each time I've challenged the proponents to debate, or rather the organizers have challenged the proponents to come out and debate me in public. Indeed tonight, I was on a website that said, debate me. Never once in Ireland, all those people that you read making these statements in the newspapers that have convinced the mass of the public that this is a wonderful policy and we are crazy people, unscientific. They cannot come out and debate this issue. They cannot defend their position in a public forum like this. And so I say the promoters of fluoridation promote it like parrots, but defend it like chickens. And I think it should be a matter of embarrassment for the Irish government. I don't know if they embarrass easily.
No,
or they don't. No, I suspected that. But I think the people should be made to feel that this is a very embarrassing thing to be attached to such an outmoded, unethical, unnecessary, unnatural practice as water fluoridation. So it's frustrating because on the one hand, fluoridation is as easy to end as turning off a tap. You just need a strong wrist, you know, go to the waterworks and turn off the tap. It's over. But in order to turn off that tap, you have to have the political will to do that. And the only way you can get that political will is to organize and educate the people so that we have many, many people saying to the government, turn off the tap! Turn off the tap. And that's why I applaud, in particular, 2 people. I know, I'm actually going to speak at 3. In the audience is Sister
Rachel.
What's that?
Sister Rachel.
Rachel, who I've worked with for over 10 years. And she has been absolutely constant in her efforts, along with Don Macaulay and others, and the late Robert Pocock, have done everything, Mary Hillary have done everything they can to educate the people. But we've suddenly got reinforcements from a superhero who's flown in pink. The girl against fluoride, Ashton Fitzgerald. And she flew into Washington, D.C. faster than the speed of light. Came to our fan conference in Washington, D.C. She opened the Sunday session in her superhero outfit, and she really got the whole audience buzzing with her ideas, which is great. And then thirdly, you have someone here you should treasure, because one of our problems is we don't have many investigative journalists left in the world. Too many journalists think it's sufficient to quote one person from one side and one the other. And in the United States it goes something like this. The CDC says that fluoridation is one of the top 10 public health achievements of the 20th century. And down the road, Mrs. Clutterbuck thinks it's a bad idea. Now, they have cited both sides, right? They cited both sides, but it's a self-fulfilling prophecy of which is going to be the most influential. So you need journalists to get beneath the glossy surface and dig deep for the facts. And you've got someone here in Adrienne who runs writes for Hot Press, and she is producing great stuff, which is not only useful for Ireland, but also in the rest of the world. And I would like to go back to the beginning and ask more journalists, more scientists, more doctors, more dentists to stop being frightened of the light. So come out, look at the facts, and share these with the people. And so I started with Ibsen. I'm going to end with Ibsen. Because Ibsen wrote another play. I wonder how many people have read Enemy of the People. One or two. It's a wonderful play. It's very short. You probably read it in an evening. It's very, very prophetic in my eyes. And the story is basically a doctor went to a resort, seaside resort, and found that the water was poisoned. And he tried to tell the people, tried to tell the mayor, the officials, that this water was poison and they need to do something about it. They didn't. Instead of listening to him, they made him the enemy of the people. Does that sound familiar to those fighting fluoridation?
Yes.
Okay. This is just a little extract towards the end. The mayor says, as a subordinate official, you have no right to express any conviction at odds with that of your superiors. Where have we heard that before? Or since, I should say since. Yeah. And Dr. Stockman answered, what I am doing in the name of truth and for the sake of my conscience. And that I say to you too. You have no need to fear that I've misled you. I speak the truth. I have no reason to lie. I'm not paid for what I do. I am privileged to do what I do because I'm working with some of the most fabulous people in quite a number of countries, both on waste and particularly on fluoridation. And I thank you. I hope that some of you will be those friends.
Just one query. You said that the effect on children were the same in both fluoridated and unfluoridated.
The dental fluorosis rates are high in both the non-fluoridated and the fluoridated. It's higher in the fluoridated than in the non-fluoridated, but we've got all these extra sources of fluoride now, which the early promoters of fluoridation had no idea. They had no idea that they were going to be marketing fluoridated toothpaste and so on. So you've got all these sources now which are contributing to dental fluorosis in both non-fluoridated and fluoridated. Now, the average figure for all American children 12 to 15 is 41%. We have reason to believe that the figure for the fluoridated communities is up around 60% or more.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you.
This is a question more about to you and to everybody. When you asked about investigative journalists, for example, getting more into it, I am a journalist. I work for a newspaper who basically Genesis Brian. But for 5 years now, I have been trying to write articles about fluoride and pictures. The editors, no. You sent them in, they want to look at it. Every year, even when Adrian, her press editor, came out and Dr. Moore started bringing out stuff, I was going, look, can you not see now that there is another side to this debate? No. Even when I ring up sometimes and say, fluoride, no, just, it's a no. Yeah. So how do journalists get around when it comes from the top and control media to get their pieces?
Well, they need to go to the tallest building in Dublin and scream their bloody mouths off, because this is such a threat to democracy. I mean, if you've got such a contentious issue and editors are quelching debate on that, that is not healthy for democracy in Ireland. You can't go around blaming the people for being ignorant about fluoridation if the outlets, the major media, are not able to convey that. But I'm glad you stressed that, because it isn't just the journalists, it is the editors that we have to worry about. And the more people that hear about this, I would say, actually, what you just said is probably 10 times more important than any scientific fact that I brought out. Because people understand that. They understand that something, you know something, I was saying to the activist, Martha in particular, Aisling's mother, you only have to look at the behavior of the promoters of this practice to realize there's something wrong. You don't have to behave this way. You don't have to have editors slashing perfectly good articles. If it was any good, the things that they're doing tell you that this is rotten. And what they're doing is hiding up that this is a rotten practice. But I just beg you, it's a difficult process if editors are doing that. So it just means that us who get informed, please talk to your friends, talk to your neighbors, talk to everybody that you can. It's really important. I should give you some good news. 257 communities have stopped fluoridation since 2010. And last month, Israel stopped fluoridation completely. So Ireland must be next.